Is the Russian annexation of Ukraine justified, or is it immoral and injudicious? Okay, so first of all, it's not the whole of Ukraine that was annexed. It was, I think, the Crimean Peninsula in the Black Sea, which was annexed, I think, in the early 2010s, in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. I may be off by a year or two. That's fine, doesn't matter. But it's the Crimean Peninsula which was annexed by Russia. Is it immoral? There's nothing moral or immoral in geopolitics. It's all about the pursuit of the national interest by any means necessary. There is no morality in the national interest. It's all about cold, hard calculations and achieving your objectives in the best possible way, using this least possible resources. Is it injudicious? Well, did Russia suffer any repercussions? None at all. So it's a very good step. It was not injudicious in the least. So let's again look at this matter from the map's perspective, geographical perspective. So let's go westwards. This here is the Black Sea, and this peninsula here in the center of the image is the Crimean Peninsula. As you can see, there is this dashed line here which Google has placed, which indicates that they are not happy with the annexation, but it is a de facto annexation and they can do nothing about it. So here, over here to the east, if you can see my pointer, this is Russian territory. It's Russia. This nation here is the Ukraine, and Crimea was a part of the Ukraine, and Russia annexed it. So there's a story behind this, right? So to understand these matters of geopolitics, you actually have to understand history, because there's always a backstory and there's some context to anything that happens right now, right? Everything that happens right now has some contextual linkages in the cause and effect chain that go back several centuries typically. So we have to go back to the time of the Mongol Empire. So in the 13th century, Chinggis Khan emerged out of nowhere in Mongolia, and he conquered a vast territory which included at the time Mongolia, China, and Iran and Central Asia, right? And after he died, the territory was expanded by his sons, who indulged in pure conquest. They did not do it in retaliation, they just did it for the sake of conquest, his sons. So after Chinggis Khan died, his territory was divided among his sons, and it was his grandson, Jochi. It was his grandson, Jochi, who was who established. It wasn't his grandson Jochi. His son was Jochi. His grandson was Batu, Jochi's son. So Chinggis Khan's grandson Batu Khan established the so-called Golden Horde, which was the northwest section of the Mongol Empire, and that essentially included much of Russia and Eastern Europe, and the Crimea region was part of it, right? So after a couple of centuries, about the 15th century or somewhere like that, when the Mongol Empire began to wane, that's when Crimea became an independent khanate, a kingdom which was called a khanate. It was called the Crimean Khanate. So it was a Turkey-sized kingdom, a Turkey-sized khanate, an Islamic kingdom, which was then in the 18th century most likely annexed by the Russian Empire. Now, the Russian Empire became the USSR after the Russian Revolution in, I think, 1917. And so Crimea became part of the USSR, as did Ukraine. Now, what happened was that the USSR assigned this region of Crimea to Ukraine at the time. Ukraine was a part of the USSR. So Crimea was assigned to Ukraine for administrative purposes, for the purpose of administration, right? For bureaucratic purposes. So Crimea became part of the Ukraine in the USSR, inside the USSR, this nation. Now, after the Soviet Union, after the USSR disintegrated in the early 1990s, all the various republics such as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Ukraine, etc., declared their independence and seceded from this old nation, and they all became independent nations. And what happened was that Ukraine kept Crimea as an independent nation after it declared its independence. So Crimea became part of the independent nation of Ukraine in the early 1990s. And at that time, Russia was in a deep recession. Russia was very weak. It was disintegrating. not the USSR, but Russia. And you had Boris Yeltsin in power, who was, well, he was not the best leader, and therefore Crimea remained with the Ukraine as an accident of history. Now, after Boris Yeltsin went his way and Vladimir Putin came in, Vladimir Putin quickly reorganized the country, took control of the country, started strengthening it economically, militarily again, etc. And he was always aware of this historical injustice that was that Crimea remained with Ukraine, became part of the Ukraine after the disintegration of the USSR. And that's why he always had his eyes on the Crimean Peninsula. In 2008, I believe the Ukrainians were complaining about Vladimir Putin issuing Russian passports to people who lived in the Crimea. And things soon came to a head. And in 2014, the Russians, basically Vladimir Putin, annexed Crimea. So for them, it is perfectly legitimate. It was always part of the USSR. It was always part of the Russian Empire. And the Russian state, the country of Russia today, is the inheritor of the legacy of the Russian Empire. And therefore, for him, it is perfectly legitimate that Crimea returns to Russia. And there's a significant Russian population as well. So there is no right or wrong. They saw this as a historical injustice and they redressed it by means of taking military action, right? So they have done what they saw is right, what they feel is right, and there is no morality or immorality in this. It's all about the balance of power. Power will do what power does, and that is the rule of geopolitics. There is no there is no morality or any such thing in that. It's all about furthering your national interest, and that's what Vladimir Putin does relentlessly.